Hello everyone, I am back and I am going to show you how I've completely redesigned the way the vents are going to be on the Grand Sport replica. Alright, if we look at the actual hood for the replica, we can see it's a fiberglass hood with aluminum vents. What I don't like is these vents are too thin. So not a big deal, but if you look, these aren't 100% straight. They just don't look to me like a high-end vent. Functional, yes, but not what I would call high-end. So originally I was going to look at having them machined out of aluminum, probably twice as thick as this, which would be a 1/16 of an inch, something like that. Maybe an eighth of an inch would be even better. So that's what I was going to do, but that was going to be time consuming and cost prohibitive, at least for now, because I have to make a mold of, or actually make a splash of this hood, send it off to the vendor, explain what I want done, and then he was going to design them from there. I would just as soon do it myself. So what I did was I took all the vents off. Now, one of the issues with the vents is that if you look, every vent requires a slot to be cut at, ideally, of course, the same angle, to the correct depth, then holes drilled to mount each of the vents. And over here as well, and if you look at the back side, there's a wall right there. So you would have to do everything from this side. And I'm just not impressed with that. And one, not only not impressed, but two, it's labor intensive. Those holes have to be drilled right, those slots have to be cut right, and then you have to put all those nuts and screws in each one of those. It's time consuming. So I thought there's got to be a better way. Now while we're here, let me show you what each of the vents look like. And they are like this. So you got to get the shape correct, and then you've got to get the bend correct, and then you've got to get the holes drilled correctly. And one of these, I don't know which one, they messed up the hole, and you can see that one's real close to the edge. That one's not as far away from the edge. That one's even further from the edge. And again, it just seems awfully labor intensive. So what I wanted to do was make it to where I could come in and make my own vent assembly as a drop-in assembly. So what I did was I needed a border around here. This is way wider than it's going to be, but this was just enough to figure out how to do the vents themselves. So this will probably be, only about that thick when I'm done with it. But I just needed something to get the right shape. So what I did was I took the hood mold and then just made carbon fiber sections here around each of the vents. And then that makes the pocket, let's call it, for the vents to go in. My idea is, let's make a vent assembly that's a pocket that slides into the hood. And that way each of these is individual. I'm not having to drill and cut and slice an actual hood, where if you screw up, you've screwed up an expensive hood. This way, worst case, you've messed up a vent or a pocket or whatever that can be much more easily remade. Additionally, I've been wanting to get into vacuum infusion and vacuum forming of carbon fiber to help with voids and pinholes and stuff like that. The smaller the piece, the easier it's going to be to do vacuum. A whole hood would be quite difficult to do. That right there won't be anywhere near as difficult, especially after I round off the edges to where there aren't sharp corners to cut the vacuum bag. My original idea was to make a rim like this all the way around. And if you remember from the other one, I got a food container right here that has a lip like I want. And so I used this as a mold, flipped it upside down, and first tried carbon fiber and epoxy. That didn't work well because of the sharp bend. So then I decided, well, why don't I just use body filler? So if you look on the left side here, that is put black gel coat in there, and then carbon fiber and epoxy on the back side. It worked okay, but not great, because it was really hard to get that carbon fiber to bend behind the gel coat. There we go. So then as I was looking for alternatives, I realized, hey, I could use body filler to do that. It worked exceptionally well. If you caught the body filler while it was still green, you could form it into the shape that you wanted. It was somewhat flexible, and then as it cured, it got harder. So I did that, but then I realized, wait a minute, I've got to make this pocket and all of that stuff, and that's going to take another couple of days to do it. So it dawned on me, wait a minute, I've got this mold right here that is the shape I need. Why don't I just make the part off of this? Now, the downside of that is this is exactly the same size as the opening, because both that hood and this were made from the exact same mold. So now what I'm going to have to do is come in here and cut a slot and narrow this by the thickness of the carbon fiber here. I'll do that in a little bit. So then I made each of the vents. So I took those aluminum vents, modified them. They weren't exactly right, so I modified them so they are the right shape. And then I made each of these off of those that were modified. So I have 5 of those. Each of these are slightly different from the other because I think these two, the first two, are close to the same because you can see it's the same height there, but then it comes down a little bit more, and right there. And then the edge also has to be slightly altered to make that work. This is the last vent here, so it would fill that in and make that an even curve. You have to take my word for it because that's hard to do with one hand. Then I wanted all of the vents to be at exactly the same angle. So I made a small template. Actually, I made a bunch of templates before I finally got what I wanted. So first I made this, and this is just out of, cardboard, thin cardboard, because it's easiest to work with. Then I cut the slots to see what that would look like, and thought I was going to use this, but it's way too flimsy to do what I needed it to do. Then I said, well, then why don't I just make them one at a time? So I made this template, which is what I used to make these uprights. So if you look, these uprights, the vents, each of the vents slide into those uprights. Now this does not stay, these uprights do not stay with the vents. It is only used to get the vents in the right location so that they can be attached. How they're going to be attached, I haven't exactly decided yet, but I'll have to decide how to do that. All right, what else do we have? I think that's it. So now that I have these done, I now need to make copies of each of these 5 vents so that I can mirror image it, because there's another set of vents over there. I did check, and the vents are the same size. They really are a mirror image. They're as close as I can come to measuring and making sure they're the same size. All right, so then what I did was I took this and drew the outline of it, put it on here, drew the outline. It's hard to see, it's in purple marker. It's really hard to get something that can show up on this black, but you can faintly see the purple marker. If you get it in the right light in the room, you can see it fairly clearly. As you see, yeah, there we go. See that mark? All right, and then I use my vibrating cutter and accurately trim. Now, these need to be straight edges here, and ideally on the bottom. The bottom doesn't really matter, but if you look, I did spend a lot of time making sure each of the vents meet with the bottom of the perimeter. We'll call it the rim. All right, so I made a straight line across here, across there. To make sure I get a straight line, I take a 1x2 and some of these clamps came from Home Depot. They're only $1 a piece, screaming deal if you ask me. And so then I line it up so that the edge of the 1x2 is even with the line for the vent. When I do this, I make sure that the board that I'm using is on the correct side. What's the correct side? Well, in this case, I cannot add any more material to this vent. So if I accidentally get offline, I would want it to where I'm making the vent bigger than it should be rather than smaller. I could have just as easily put this board on the other side and trimmed it But then if I slipped or anything and came down, I would have completely ruined this vent. This way, if I slip and go up, all I've done is wasted a little bit of material here, but my vent is still good. By the same token, when I come down here, I'm going to put the piece of wood to where it stops here and then trim along this bottom edge. And if I accidentally slip, it's no big deal. I can come back in and reuse the cutter or sand it or whatever. Now, on those same lines, I found out while I can sand it, I've got a really coarse grit. I think it's 40 grit sanding block around here somewhere. Yeah, there it is. And this thing's been used forever. I only use it for rough sanding, so you can see it's been used a lot. But it takes away material really quickly. But really quickly and quickly enough are two different things. So what I found is it's easier to go back and trim with the cutting tool. If I accidentally, let's say, get offline a little bit and come out here, it's easier to come back and get it as straight as I absolutely can with the cutter and the piece of wood, rather than trying to sand it, because it does take a lot of while to sand it. The other thing is I'm trying not to get carbon fiber dust on me, because just like fiberglass, it itches. And so I've done a pretty good job lately of learning how to not do that. Before that, I would sit at my lap and do it because it was easiest to control, but then I would end up getting carbon fiber dust everywhere. Now I use the trash can as a fixture. And when I cut it, let me show you what I'll do. I take this, make it span the trash can. Sometimes it takes a bit of orienting. And so I'll cut this edge up to a certain point. Let's say I'll put it to where there. I'll cut up to here and then go, oh, I'm gonna hit the trash can. I really don't wanna cut my trash can. So then I'll slide it over here, continue on till I get here, probably do this, and then slide it over here and complete the cut. That's just the straight part. I'll come along, do the bottom straight part, and then I'll come in and do this. The curve is a little bit difficult to do, but I've gotten to where I can get pretty accurate with the curve. And then of course I can use my sanding block to finish it off. The final thing that I've got to do that I have not figured out is this is a piece of foam board that has carbon fiber put on each side, a single layer, and then epoxy on there. Because it's skinned on there, you can see it's got a rough texture. We will end up putting more epoxy on here to get this smooth, because I like the glass look of it. This also is it's going to be exposed carbon fiber. You can see that it did look good right there, but there were some minor surface defects we had to fix. And so we're going to do that. Once we get this smooth and another layer of epoxy, this will look just like this polished part right here. So this will end up having a nice carbon fiber finish on it. Everything here will have a nice glossy carbon fiber finish on it when we're done. All right, I think that's everything I can think of. If you have any questions, be sure and let me know. I'm happy to answer them, but that's what I'm doing today. I'm hoping to get the rest of those done. And while we're at it, the other thing is that, see, there's a slight defect here and here. It's not very bad, but the fact that that's glossy and didn't get sanded means that's a low spot. What we've been doing is using CA glue or super glue, and you just put a little bit of super glue on there. You spray it with accelerator. I don't know where the super glue and accelerator is, probably in the back. But the accelerator makes it harden instantly. And so then you can use it kind of like a pseudo body filler and fill in minor imperfections. Of course, you wouldn't want to do some big area. If it's a big area, we go ahead and put epoxy down. But in these minor areas, we just use the CA glue and put it on there. In this case, what we're going to have to do is, because I have to cut this and narrow it, so because this won't fit in, I'm probably gonna have to narrow it, I don't know, a 1/16 of an inch, an 1/8 of an inch. I'll have to decide what to do when I get to that point. But I'm going to take a cutter and cut it here and there to narrow it widthwise, and then somewhere in here to narrow it lengthwise, or however you want to call it. And so then I'll make it to where it will slide into the hole in the center there. And so once I do that, I will have to glue it back together. Again, I'll use CA glue to do that. But so that we don't have a seam at the end, we're going to cover this, skin it with a single layer of carbon fiber so that this outside rim will be absolutely solid. And then it will also cover up where the seam is, because there's going to be 4 seams. And ideally, I don't want those 4 seams to show. That's only for cosmetics. And after this first one, it won't have to be done. The next one, we're going to make a mold off of this. When we make a mold off this, then the parts that come straight out of the mold will be correct. One of the major factors of doing all of this was, once I got the vents made, how am I going to secure them in? And again, you saw that way it's very tedious with all of the screws. The advantage of this is, let's say maybe 4 screws, one here, one there, on the side so they don't show, or maybe on the back and the front. Yeah, the back and the front would make it to where they really don't show. And then that will secure this in place without having, any major issues. You can drill those 4 holes. You can hand drill those 4 holes and get them right. So that's going to make the assembly much easier and much faster. Okay, that's all I have. So, like, subscribe, hit the alert, hit the thanks if you want to donate. And if you don't like what we're doing, you don't know Jack. Bye.